We're back with you on In Focus, and thanks for staying on tonight. Don't forget, at any point in our conversations, you can weigh in on the deliberations going on 072-110-5584. We want to engage with you. We like those engagements and those questions and comments that are put forward. You can also drop us an X at Newzroom 405. Let's turn to this now. New housing policy and strategy for South Africa has been introduced by the Department of Human Settlements. It seeks to repeal the Housing Act of 1997, which the department says is inconsistent with and misaligned to the sector needs, and so needs some reforms, especially looking at what has occurred over the last 30 years in the implementation of some of those policies. Minister Mmamoloko Kubayi joins us now for more on that. Minister, good evening. Good to have you, and thank you very much for coming on. People will say...
Good evening, Thabo, and good evening to the viewers at home.
I can already hear some people saying, you know, the ANC likes to fix something that is not broken. Nothing wrong with the police. Every time they fail to deliver, they want to tinker with legislation and tinker with the policies. Not the policy that's the problem. It's the people that have been put in charge of governing this policy that are failing to implement. What is so wrong with the Act?
That's not correct. We can safely say from Human Settlements portfolio, Thabo, that the 1996 white paper definitely is outdated and does need to be reviewed. For us to implement the programs and projects that we want to do in the manner that we want to do, we have to amend them, because that's what governs how we do it. On the basis of our work, having delivered 4.8 million units of houses to the people of South Africa, and having done so much in terms of reduction of informality in the country and ensuring that majority of South Africans have shelter. It is out of those that we are now seeing the experiences that we have. One of the examples is that previously we never had the disasters in the manner that we have. And therefore how we plan our settlements has to be different. We were previously called Department of Housing. If you go and check in our policies, it's called White Paper Policy on Housing. You check Housing Code, you check the Act, is about housing. It does not talk to the integrated manner that currently we are actually starting to implement our programs. And that's why we say where people live, it's not about a house, but it's also about social amenities. We must be able to have people staying closer to schools, people having access to police station where they live, but also being able to stay closer to where they work. And therefore, that's why this policy review is critical to encourage us and to encourage South Africans so that they can participate, but share their views to say this is what they want to do. Previously, in 1997, the issue of alternative building technologies were not in existence nor implemented in the country. We intending to ensure that going forward, there's options and also qualifying those who are able to build with alternative technologies they are able to do. This is out of feedback as well in our implementation, where people have said to us, look, there are issues of qualifying criteria that needs to be reviewed, are not responding to what we are facing as challenges in terms of beneficiaries, but also in terms of the management of the system. So that's what informs our review.
So, I mean, if you speak to an organization like SERI, who we speak to quite often, is their criticism would be, you're now changing the law, but your officials are still having difficulty understanding even the current law, for example, on issues of eviction and ensuring that there's alternatives. Saying this is the reason why government keeps losing in the courts. Because you keep going to the courts, you want to evict people and you lose there because you just simply can't interpret properly what the Constitution says, for example, about how evictions should be conducted.
Look, the issue around evictions, let's talk about what people are reflecting. I don't think it's correct to say that there's misinterpretation of what we have to do. Remember, in terms of evictions, it happens with the property owner. So even if you are a private owner and you are to evict, the PIA Act applies to you. In terms of ensuring that you can be able to evict within the particular process. So we are cognizant of what it does, but it has weaknesses. This is a good policy that was meant to protect, for example, farm dwellers being evicted by your farm owners farmers. so that they are not on the streets. And therefore, it talks about 48 hours. But when you have an informal settlement that has just started, and you, as a municipality, for example, find that municipalities are saying to us, we do not have the capacity, for example, to be able to evict within that 48 hours. And therefore, later we are requested with no budget, with no resources to be able to provide an alternative accommodation. And where we want to say, people who are coming in this illegal occupied land must go back to where they are coming from. And those are the issues that relate to municipalities and relate to the enforcement of bylaws, but also the development of bylaws within municipalities. So it's a different sphere of government in terms of that. We do not evict because currently we do not have properties that are with us. The current ones are run by SHIs, for example, in social housing. So the property owner, which is an SHI, Social Housing Institute, will be the one that evicts. So we hardly have, as the Department of Human Settlement, having to evict, but municipalities have. Yes. And that's why they've raised it with me to say, I must speak to Minister Titiza to help them in the agriculture space, because that's where the Act is, so that they are able to review that and make provision for protection of those that should not be evicted, but also where we need to protect the state and ensure that development can happen properly. It happens properly.
It's precisely that what I'm saying, is that there is a lack of synergy in terms of planning as well with what needs to be executed at a local level. So you'd hear Mayor saying, well, it's not my mandate to deliver so many houses. It's a competency of national. To be able to deliver these houses. But these people are occupying this land illegally. Where do I take them, right? And I've written to National. National is not coming back to me. I don't know. So I just leave these people to occupy the land illegally. You know, that kind of synergy and being able to work together.
No, we do work together, Thabo, from human settlement point of view. What we have, for example, the first point is that we've got MINMEC, that is the minister, the deputy minister, all the provincial MECs of human settlements or responsible for human settlements, and the metros, but also SALGA, representative sits on behalf of municipalities. This is where we do planning. They do the business plans in terms of the provinces to implement across the country. We authorize them. We are the policy directive department or policy holder. The implementing of the projects is in the provinces and is in the municipalities. How we govern that is done through the grant system. So each year, a province and a municipality, for example, the metros, will submit their business plans and say, this is what we are going to plan, we are going to implement, and therefore we give them the grants after Treasury has allocated. And monthly, there is allocation of that money, we monitor on that. So from synergy point of view, there is. But the issue of illegal occupation of land is a different story, because it's governed by a different legislation that for eviction you've got to. So the mayor can't say he's waiting for the minister to provide for the land, because for the alternative accommodation of the people. Because the mayor, within 48 hours, the mayor must be able to ensure that there's evictions, so that they don't have to wait for the minister. Where the challenge is, as I'm explaining, is that in municipalities, for example, where you do not have law enforcement agencies, such as your metropolis, to enforce the bylaws, it becomes a challenge, because then they pick up after the deadline of 48 hours, where they now have an obligation of an alternative accommodation. What is ideal and what we should be also doing in municipalities is to evict within the time that is allowed. Then you do not have the pressures in terms of unplanned processes or having to come back with it. But where we have already informal settlements that have started, we have an informal settlement upgrading program where we give the grant to the province, we give the grant to the municipalities, the metros, so that they can do in situ, what we call in situ upgrading, where in that informal settlements we are able to provide services, first in terms of temporary services, but also upgrading in terms of bulk infrastructure. And where the land is not suitable, we are able to then say we purchase land and then we relocate people. There's been quite a number of projects that have been successful. We're currently working on 1,500 informal settlements across the country in terms of various stages of upgrading.
Minister Mmamoloko Kubayi still with us, joining us on that conversation on the new housing policy strategy for South Africa. So what are the policy anchors, Minister, for example, that are going to deal with the issue that we spoke about the last time I spoke to you, the escalating cost of development it's becoming too expensive for government, and it keeps rising with the rent being hit and the economy the way that it is. You'll start a project at 200 million, it ends up at 2 billion by the time it is finished.
The first issue is around us ensuring that annually, as we allocate the budget, we've got to cater for inflations. Previously, it's not been a consistent thing within the budget allocation, and that's why we had projects that were unfinished and abandoned, because sometimes contractors, not because they've been corrupt, but because it has just become unviable for them to complete the project based on the business model that they have or the incomes. So that's why annually then within the review, we will include the issue of annual inflation as part of what the provinces and the municipalities will have to budget for. The second area in terms of improvement that we look at to ensure that the quality of service that we do is the work around NHBRC, where we also have a legislation currently in the NCOP that protects consumers in terms of the quality of work. But again, another option that we are looking at is the issue of insuring of the RDP houses. Because if you look at it, you have somebody who sits in an RDP house, it doesn't get renovated over time, then it needs to be what we call rectification. It becomes not affordable for government, and that's why we want to look at the point where we have a mechanism, like you do with your sasarias and all that, that we have a mechanism that protects and they can be utilized for that. And the last point around even the issues of financing and affordability goes beyond just what we provided government. One of the inputs that we received when we dealt with the NGOs was that you've got people, they were saying to us, Minister, as government, you guys have responsibility to protect both private and public households. Now, somebody buys a house, which is 20 years in terms of bond repayment. They pay 19 years. They are left with less than 100,000 and they lose a job. Then they get evicted from the house. So it's some of the things that are coming up to say, can you find mechanisms to protect consumers in this area as a policy directive point and a policy maker for the country, not only for government. So when we look at policy, we're not looking at what we are doing with the RDPs, what we are doing in terms of the issues of what we provide, but for the entirety of the sector. The issue of the Office of Disclosure as well, it's something that we look into. This is where banks disclose how many people they've been able to give in terms of credit for low income, which we call the gap market, in the low income brackets, how many households in terms of that we are able to monitor, and the issue of how many have been rejected in terms of credit availability, so that we can ensure that there's shelter for everyone. When the Constitution says to us we must ensure that there's shelter, people have a right to shelter. It's not because it says it must be done by government. We must create a conducive environment for also people to be able to access shelter in the private space.
Yeah. The high cost of developed land has become a very key issue as well, close, as you mentioned earlier on, to economic activity. So what are the policy enablers that are going to be able to address that?
What we are doing, we are designating, currently we have designated 136 priority development areas, and we'll continue to do that, but also gazette the strategic parcels of land that will be utilized for human settlements, so that we can be able to build closer to where people are working, where they reduce the cost of traveling. Secondly, it's the issue of what we want to do in the policy as well, and what we are hoping that it comes stronger in terms of policy inputs, or public inputs. It's the issue of inner city buildings. Currently, we are working on a process, Thabo, where there are buildings, government-owned buildings, both in terms of pre-1994, that people have been staying in for years. We've been saying that they must be transferred to the hands of the people, and we will be gazetting as well. That is part of the issue, that all of them must be in the hands of the people, and the title deeds must be handed over. So it's those things that we're working on in terms of review, so that there isn't a state property where people people reside, that they are not able to have a title deed for where they've been staying for years in terms of residential accommodation. The issue of apartheid, dealing with apartheid legacy, means that we do away with all those things of non-ownership and the security of tenure with people. So those are some of the integrated approaches that we've got. And obviously the other issue is that Minister of Human Settlement can expropriate without compensation. We've avoided this, but where it is necessary, and that's why we want to make it clear that where it is necessary, we end up without a property or a land available closer to where people will be. We will be able to expropriate. Right now, we've been advised by legal teams to say, firstly, before you can want to expropriate from even private hands, you should be able to utilize state properties or state land. And one of the areas, because we are seeing even municipalities and also provinces sometimes wants to dispose land that is strategic for human settlement to private developers or to private owners, for sometimes even for commercial use. And this is what we want to put in the policy, so that the first right of refusal must be the human settlements portfolio.
The other gap that has been noted here as I'm reading this white paper is the integration of communities spatially. So in terms of spatial planning and in terms of demand management, what has been the challenge, and how are you planning to solve it then with these new policies?
Yes, when you look at the concept of mega projects and mega cities, that's the concept that brings people together, where you do not have those who are poor staying in one side, which are in the RTPs, and then those who are renting or those in bonded houses stay in separate sides. So you see the concept of bringing people together in terms of those, where you have a project that has RTP houses that will have social housing in terms of rental stock, but also that will have the issue of what will have the bonded houses, like your riverside view in Gauteng, in Johannesburg. It's one of the examples of the projects that are almost like that. And that's what we're looking at in terms of ensuring that people can stay together, integrated, without separating us as per our income or in terms of our affordability, but building communities together. And what it does, then you are able to build together availed sites for both in terms of private and public clinic in that area, public and private schools in those areas as part of the sites, and ensuring that there's integration. But more and more, if you look at our pipeline of social housing, you'll see that social housing specifically, because it's for rentals purposes, this is people who are coming to urban cities for particularly looking for job opportunities. Many of them don't want to buy, but they want to rent. And these are the ones that we are providing in terms of low-cost rental services through our social housing program. And those, you understand that they will be within inner cities, where closer to work. We just opened one recently here in Goodwood towards the end of the year, Goodwood in Western Cape, where majority of the people who stay in that project or in that site, that Goodwood project, they actually work in Grand West. So they literally walk to work. And that is part of ensuring that we ease the burden, but we make sure that people are staying closer to where they work. And this is what we continue to expand. I would have shared some of the projects that exist during my debate this morning in Parliament, to say we have a huge pipeline and want to expand into it. Yeah. But what has come in part of policy input is that we should be able not to look at SHIs only. But they said, some of the people and in the NGO sector that I was meeting yesterday, they proposed that can we look at the issue of micro developers below what we are having as SHIs and support them and provide funding for them. The issue of backyard dwellers, we need to be clear in terms of our policy, because they sit in areas where closer to economic opportunities, and they've asked us to be clear, because currently we do not have a policy nor a program that responds to them.
Minister, let me appreciate you. Thank you very much for coming on this evening. That is the Minister of Human Settlements, Mmamoloko Kubayi.